On July 16, 2025, Canada shocked the world by imposing a sweeping 25% tariff, a move that would reverberate across continents and industries. The announcement came seemingly out of nowhere, catching both allies and rivals off guard. For decades, Canada had been known for its measured approach to global trade, rarely making waves on the international stage. But this time the government decided to act decisively, signaling a dramatic shift in its economic policy. The new tariff targeted all products containing steel that was originally melted and poured in China, regardless of where the final product was assembled or shipped from. This meant that even goods passing through third countries or rebranded elsewhere would not escape the sweeping measure. This bold move, announced by Prime Minister Mark Carney in a packed press conference, was a direct strike at China's industrial dominance. The government's intent was clear: to block Chinese steel from entering North America, even if it was routed through other countries, and to protect Canadian and American industries from what they described as unfair competition. The U.S. Trump administration, which had long urged its allies to take a tougher stance on China, was initially surprised by the speed and scale of Canada's action. However, the White House quickly voiced strong support, framing the move as a powerful display of North American solidarity and a united front against what they called China's aggressive trade practices. In Beijing, officials were caught off guard by the sudden escalation. The Chinese government condemned the tariff as a hostile act, accusing Canada of bowing to U.S. pressure and vowing swift retaliation. Diplomatic channels buzzed with urgent messages as China weighed its response, warning of potential consequences for Canadian exporters. The policy's focus on the origin of steel added a new layer of complexity to already tangled global supply chains. Companies scrambled to trace the source of their materials, while international markets reacted with volatility. Stock prices for major manufacturers and shipping companies plunged, and uncertainty rippled through boardrooms around the world. Canada, a nation usually seen as cautious and diplomatic, had suddenly thrust itself into the center of a major geopolitical confrontation. The move forced other countries to reconsider their own trade stances, sparking urgent debates at the United Nations and among G7 leaders about the future of global commerce and alliances. The stage was set for a tense and unpredictable standoff. With millions of jobs and the future of North American manufacturing hanging in the balance, the world watched anxiously to see how this unprecedented trade war would unfold and what it would mean for the global economy in the months and years ahead. Understand why Canada took such drastic action. It's important to first grasp the concept of steel dumping, a practice that has far-reaching consequences for economies around the world. Steel dumping occurs when a country exports products, like steel, to another nation at prices below the cost of production. This is often made possible by government subsidies, which allow foreign producers to sell their goods at artificially low prices, undercutting local manufacturers. The impact on local industries can be devastating. When dumped steel floods the market, domestic companies struggle to compete, leading to factory closures, mass layoffs, and the decline of entire communities that depend on these jobs for their livelihoods. In Canada, the steel sector has long warned that Chinese dumping is eroding its market share. Offshore steel imports surged from 19% in 2014 to a staggering 39% by 2022, putting immense pressure on Canadian producers and threatening the stability of the industry. China's state-backed steel industry has created massive overcapacity, projected to reach 50 million tons by 2025. In 2024 alone, Chinese steel exports hit a record 115 million tons, flooding global markets and driving down prices worldwide. For Canada, this wasn't just an economic challenge, it was an existential threat to its steel sector and the thousands of families it supports. The situation sparked urgent calls from workers, unions, and industry leaders for decisive government intervention. The new tariffs were introduced not as an act of aggression, but as a necessary defensive measure. They were designed to level the playing field, ensuring Canadian workers and businesses could compete fairly in their own market. Industry leaders and workers alike hailed the move as essential to counteract unfair dumping practices and to protect a vital sector from predatory international trade tactics. For many, it was the only way to secure the future of Canadian steel. Canada's steel blockade was the result of escalating trade actions over the previous year, not a sudden decision. It began in October 2024 with a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs and 25% on Chinese steel and aluminum, followed by new rules requiring importers to declare steel's country of origin. These steps targeted loopholes that let Chinese steel enter North America via third countries. U.S. pressure intensified in early 2025 as the Trump administration imposed tariffs on Canada and Mexico, pushing Ottawa to align with Washington's hardline stance. By July, Canada's full-scale block on Chinese-origin steel was a calculated escalation, signaling the end of business as usual in North American trade. Washington's reaction to Canada's steel move was a mix of surprise and satisfaction. After years of urging allies to confront China, the Trump administration saw Canada's action as a breakthrough, proof that North America could present a united front. The U.S. quickly offered political cover, reframing Canada's risky move as continental solidarity. This support was crucial for Prime Minister Carney, insulating him from international criticism and emboldening Canada to stand firm. Behind the scenes, the U.S. steel lobby watched closely, but the strategic priority was clear: confront China. Canada's bold step let Washington advance its agenda without firing the first shot. The result, a new North American alliance fundamentally shifting the dynamics of the trade dispute. In Beijing, Canada's steel blockade was met with disbelief and anger. Chinese officials condemned the move as blatant protectionism and a violation of trade norms, warning of inevitable retaliation. Beijing insisted its steel exports were competitive, not subsidized, and accused Canada of acting on baseless claims. The timing, amid U.S.-China tensions, made Canada's alignment with Washington feel like a political betrayal. State media accused Canada of sacrificing its own interests to please the U.S., vowing that consequences would follow. China's threats quickly became specific, targeting vulnerable Canadian sectors. The dispute escalated from trade spat to a matter of national pride and strategy for Beijing. Canada had crossed a line, triggering a full-blown economic conflict with one of the world's most powerful nations. Then, before the steel blockade, Canadian farmers were already suffering from China's retaliation against earlier tariffs. For years, these farmers had built their livelihoods on exporting high-quality crops and livestock to global markets, especially China. But as diplomatic tensions escalated, their world began to unravel. In March 2025, Beijing imposed 100% tariffs on Canadian canola, oil cakes and peas, and 25% on pork and aquatic products, devastating the agricultural heartland. These tariffs didn't just target products, they struck at the core of rural communities, threatening family farms that had operated for generations. Canola exports to China, worth nearly $5 billion, collapsed overnight, sending prices plummeting and leaving farmers with unsold crops. Storage bins overflowed, and the uncertainty rippled through every part of the supply chain, from seed suppliers to local equipment dealers. The U.S. compounded the pain, slapping a 35% tariff on Canadian canola, closing off another vital market. With two of their largest buyers suddenly out of reach, Canadian farmers found themselves with nowhere to turn. Warehouses filled, financial panic spread, and many farmers faced bankruptcy. Some were forced to auction off equipment or even their land, while others took on crushing debt just to survive another season. Critics accused the government of sacrificing agriculture to appease the U.S., leaving farmers exposed to predictable Chinese retaliation. Many felt abandoned by policymakers who seemed more focused on international alliances than on the people feeding the nation. For those on the ground, political debates in Ottawa felt distant. They were left to bear the brunt of a global trade war. Each day brought new uncertainty, as families wondered if their farms would survive to see another harvest. The golden fields of canola became a symbol of economic ruin in a geopolitical crossfire. What was once a source of national pride now stood as a stark reminder of how international disputes can devastate everyday lives. Shut out of Canada's canola market, China quickly pivoted to Australia, the world's second-largest producer. Chinese buyers placed massive orders for Australian canola, rewarding a country that had recently improved ties with Beijing. This realignment punished Canada while strengthening China's leverage over global supply chains. The message to other exporters was clear: China could, and would, find alternatives if provoked. For Canada, the loss of the Chinese market was no longer temporary, it was a structural shift. Officials now faced the daunting task of finding new buyers for billions in lost exports. The global trade map was being redrawn, and Canada was on the outside looking in. Tariffs meant to save Canadian steel brought chaos instead. Producers, relieved from cheap imports, now faced market volatility and supply headaches as Chinese-origin steel vanished overnight. Companies reliant on specific Chinese steel scrambled for pricier alternatives while overstocked inventories became a financial mess. Businesses across Canada, especially in regions far from central mills, saw costs spike, squeezing margins and fueling inflation. The policy's double edge was clear. It protected steelmakers but hurt manufacturers, builders, and consumers. Instead of stability, the industry faced disruption and uncertainty. The government's bold move exposed the painful trade-offs of protectionism. Canada's steel blockade ignited fierce debate, exposing deep divisions over the nation's place between the US and China. Prime Minister Carney's government called it a necessary defense of industry and sovereignty, accepting short-term pain for long-term gain. Critics, led by conservative Pierre Poilievre, accused the Liberals of sacrificing agriculture for steel and serving US interests. Economists warned the tariffs were overkill, risking Canada's export-driven economy and setting a dangerous precedent. As the dust settled, the future was uncertain. Could new markets replace China? Would higher costs cripple Canadian competitiveness? The government had made its bet. Now, the consequences were unfolding in real time. The outcome of this bold move would define Canada's economic and geopolitical reality for years to come.